This podcast is brought to you by Ironsite. The logistical complexity of oil and gas field operations can make it difficult to stay on top of who is doing what, where, and when. That's where Ironsite comes in. And so Ironsite connects E&Ps, midstream companies, and service providers so they can collaborate and coordinate with the field services and internal resources more efficiently. Ironsite was designed to support everything from fluid hauling and hot shots to maintenance and trades, making it one of the most versatile field operations and logistics management tools on the market. How do they do it? Well, the secret sauce is, regardless of what type of service, every single job you need done is going to follow the same core workflow. Somebody requests a job, it gets scheduled, the job gets executed, what gets done is documented, and it's reviewed, approved, and the data and the documentation gets sent wherever it needs to go kind of from there. So Ironside has spent years perfecting their fit-for-purpose function, making their core workflow configurable to any field activity so that you can lower operating costs, reduce your risk, and be more effective across your entire field operation. So whether you work for an E&P, midstream company, or service provider, if you're managing field operations and logistics, you're going to want to take a look at Ironside. They were also the Energy Tech Night Midland winner a few years back. They've also been on the podcast in the past, good friends of ours. So go check them out. Visit ironside.app/DW to learn if your company is eligible for a free 3-month trial. It's Ironside, SIGHT.app/DW. Click the link in the description and let them know that we sent you.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another week of the Oil and Gas Startups podcast. We got my boy John from Flodatix, which he just told me that a lot of people mess up the name for Flodatix. Apparently, I'm just kind of special and I got it right the first time. But
you nailed it.
I thought it was pretty easy, but apparently, there's a way to butcher everything. So, dude, appreciate you being here down in Houston with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're excited to talk about it.
Yeah, man. So what brought you to town? What are you doing in town? You got some client meetings or?
No, yeah. I mean, so we actually sublease some space in Katy, not too far away for some of the meters. So we've got space here.
Where's that at specifically? I live in Katy.
It's off Vanderbilt.
Okay. Not sure where that's at.
I'm not a local, so I don't
I can't help you out either. Yeah.
But yeah, it's awesome. I guess kind of central Katy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're from Colorado.
Yep.
Where at specifically?
So I grew up in Morrison, so kind of the west side of Denver.
Yeah.
Right by Red Rocks Amphitheater.
Yeah.
Kind of right in there.
Awesome. And you're a mines alumni.
Correct.
Petroleum engineer. So tell me, what is Flodatix? Which I'm going to give a plug here. Flodatix is presenting at Energy Tech Night in Midland coming up. I don't know if this podcast will be out by then. I'll make sure it's out by then.
Okay. Sounds good.
So tell us just like real quick, the 2-minute pitch on what Flodatix is and what y'all do.
Yeah. So really simple. We make one product and that's a multi-phase flow meter. So a multi-phase flow meter is really just a meter to measure multiple phases of fluids without having to separate them out.
Yeah.
So measuring oil, gas, water in a pipe, that's kind of our specialty, what we do. I think kind of what makes us unique relative to other multi-phase flow meters, because there's a number of them out there. I think in the US market, a lot of people have tried them, haven't necessarily loved them. There's a lot of maintenance, a lot of handling that comes with it.
Yeah.
So a lot of existing meters have a nuclear source, which means you've got to do some of the permitting, the handling to deal with that type of material.
Yeah, so you have a low radiation source that's actually sitting inside the meter. That's interesting.
Exactly. So for us, we don't have a nuclear source. So it makes it a lot easier from a handling, getting on a well site. You don't have to do any of the permitting.
You want to hear a funny story about nuclear sources? So back in, I want to call it 2011 or 2012, I used to run wireline, and we had to handle nuclear sources for when we logged wells, and Halliburton's shop was right next to us as well. And Halliburton wireline hands were out one day. And, when you transport your source in wireline, very tight on the security. It's kept in a bunker.
Right.
You have to go get it from a bunker. You have to put it in what's called a pig, and it's this big steel container. Then that pig has to be, double locked, has to be chained to the pickup. You have to, go through this checklist to make sure that radiation source isn't lost. And anyways, these guys are driving back from a location and they lose their source. They get to the shop and they don't have it. ATF comes in, DEA. All the feds come in and they've got helicopters, they've got planes.
Probably shut down highways.
Yeah, crazy response. They put the wireline hands in jail for a couple weeks while they look for this thing.
Wow.
Anyways, some old boy, some pumper, thinks that he finds some random bolt on a lease, throws it in the back of his pickup, and he's driving around for 2 weeks with this radiation source in the back. And so
how'd they find it?
So they ended. I mean, it kind of became a big deal with like a lot of press and media. And that guy was like, "Oh, I think I have that in the back of my pickup truck."
He just saw a news story.
Yeah, saw a news story and was like, "I picked that up." And so, anyways, it's a pain, right? Having to deal with those things.
Yeah, and it's a safety risk, I mean, for guys, and a security risk too. I think, most of the time it's trace amounts, but if somebody got a hold of it, knew what to do with it.
That's what the most ridiculous thing is to me is like, I would pick these things up with my hand and I haven't turned into a Ninja Turtle yet. I mean, it's super low trace.
I think it's more like the potential of what it could be used for.
Yeah.
A lot of times is maybe the bigger concern.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. Regardless, it's heavily regulated and tons of security around it. And so just a ton of, permitting.
Yeah, it's just a pain to operate. So we don't have a nuclear source. And then we also, the meter is based pretty much fully on tomography. It's like electromagnetic sensors that are able to image inside the pipe.
Okay.
So one of the cool things our meter can do relative to what else is out there is we can actually create like a 3D time lapse of the fluids in the pipe. So you can see oil, gas, water flowing. If there's gas slugs.
I want to dive into this tomography. I'm not familiar with that. And so dive in and unpack this a little bit and understand you're sitting across from the table from someone that doesn't know what you're talking about. So try to break it down easily. But really cool that you can have this 3D model to actually see, the volume of fluid and, whether it's oil or water, whatever it may be. But how does that actually work in layman's terms?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to explain it is it's similar to taking an MRI of a cross section of the pipe.
Okay.
So there's electromagnetic sensors that are basically measuring different, whether it's change in magnetic field or conductivity of fluids going through the pipe, and basically able to take those cross sections and say, okay, this pixel is oil, this pixel is gas, this pixel is water.
Interesting.
And then you can essentially create like a stack of those cross sections to create a video.
Yeah. Is that like algorithm driven to take all of those, essentially a screenshot and, kind of compress all of these together?
100%. So there are some other meters out there that use tomography. I think the biggest, piece of secret sauce really is the fact that we're using a few different types of sensors, and then we have the software to tie them all together to accurately compute rates, oil, gas, water.
Yeah.
And different sensors work better in different flow conditions.
Yeah.
So when oil is a continuous phase or water is continuous phase, those have different like conductive properties. And so different sensors tend to work better in those different flow regimes.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, there's both a hardware component and a software component to y'all's business. And the software component is like, hey, look, you can have this hardware and these sensors, but you need software to actually tie it all together and get actionable information from it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the software is really the only thing that's going to take this raw signal data, which is useless kind of on its own. And the software is really what's taking those raw signals and saying, okay, like I go from a magnetic field measurement to oil flow rate. Yeah. There's a lot of math that gets done along the way to do that.
So the historical traditional way of metering fluids, can you explain how that's been done before these multi-phase meters were built?
Sure. So before multi-phase, I mean, even today, like if you go to a well site in Colorado or Texas or wherever, they may be set up a little differently, but the general concept is you have a separator, and then you have something like a Coriolis meter for oil, a turbine or a Coriolis for water, and then something like an orifice meter to measure gas. And so, that setup that's what's widely accepted. Some people have, in Colorado, they separate every well most of the time on new pads.
So let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of people listen to this show. There's a lot of production engineers that, this was probably too basic for them. They know what a separator is, but interested in unpacking it a little bit for someone that may not be familiar with production surface equipment.
Yep.
And so you talk about the separator, and that's where all of your fluids go into and then essentially get sorted out.
Yeah, exactly. So the stream, off the well is basically producing oil, gas, and water all commingled together.
Mm-hmm.
That's piped to the piece of equipment called the separator. And the separator is kind of basically taking those three phases and pulling them out into separate streams. So one pipe goes in the front of the separator, the back end of the separator. You're going to have three flow lines.
Yeah.
One for oil, one for water, one for gas.
Yeah. Which, just based off of physics, I mean, oil, everyone knows that, oil and water doesn't mix. And so that's how your separator works internally.
Exactly. Yeah. So the oil is usually a little bit lighter than your water. So oil is kind of going to the top of the liquids, and then gas is usually coming out of the top of the separator.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to illustrate there is that it's a very mechanical process. A separator is just kind of dummy iron, essentially. And so, it's funny. I don't know why this got brought up in my mind when you just like, an oil and gas well, you produce oil and gas and water. And I used to own these oil wells up in Oklahoma, and one of my wells would do 2 barrels of oil a day and 250 of water. Yeah. And it was a water well that happened to produce a little bit of oil.
There's a lot of those out there. There's a lot of those out there for sure.
And so I don't know why that, I just kind of got like NAM flashbacks for some reason when you said that. But so that's super interesting. When did, and maybe let's talk about your background a little bit before I go. I'm super intrigued by this and curious about it. But like I said, you went to mines, and then what after mines?
Yeah, so I graduated May of 2016. So oil price was about $30 a barrel. It's kind of the bottom of the last downturn prior to COVID, and I had worked for PDC Energy in Denver, kind of through school. Yeah. Thought that was kind of my career path, was go work for those guys.
What assets did you work with? I did some work for PDC up in Ohio.
Yeah. Okay. So I spent 2 summers on the DJ stuff, and then 1 summer in the Ohio, like their Utica stuff.
Was that production or drilling and completion?
The Ohio stuff was it was really more like a, I don't know what they'd call it, like completion design optimization, I guess. So looking at different designs, seeing what the impact was to production and figuring out what we should do next.
Got you.
So I probably spent a summer, and then during the school year working on that Ohio asset.
Got you. Yeah. I ran some expandable casing up there. I think it was open hole liner that got stuck drilling. And so it's never a good time when I'm coming on location because you're already in a shit mess. So I'm never getting called out unless it's a bad time. But
I think I can't remember what year they sold the asset, but the tricky thing for them, I mean, most of that area is really like a gas play.
Yeah.
And they were kind of in an oilier area, and I think hoping it was going to be more of a liquids play. And, but it was a tight window. I mean, the Utica goes from dry gas to black oil, like 30, 40 miles, something like that, east to west.
So at PDC, and then you said you graduated in what year?
May of 2016.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Actually, that's probably about the time that I was up in.
We may have crossed paths.
Yeah, we might have crossed paths somehow. But so what after PDC?
So May of 2016, I graduated. They kind of said, hey, we got a full-time offer for you, just not yet, hold off. But I was graduating, needed to pay the bills.
Yeah,
so started looking
can't hold
around.
off too long.
Yeah, exactly. So started looking around, found a group that had raised money to invest in oil field service companies that was looking to hire an engineer and then kind of train them to be an analyst.
Yeah.
So really how to value a company, how to model the growth of that company, and how to create an exit.
Yeah.
So I did that for 5 years and really just kind of started out doing the modeling. And then over time, as I got to understand how business works, how you create equity value, got more and more involved with helping the portfolio companies, whether it was digital kind of strategy, implementing new tech to help, their base business.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time doing that.
Very cool.
And then I left, I guess it would have been March of 21, and joined a C&I solar developer in a corporate development role. So,
interesting.
Kind of a total pivot.
So you go from oil and gas to solar development.
Yeah. And it was a solar developer backed by NCAP. So in my head, I was kind of thinking, okay, this is like, a traditional oil and gas fund.
Yeah.
maybe I'll see what this is about. And
where were the assets at?
so they, the company was based in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay. Yeah.
But they had assets, I guess, Boulder and Boston, but they acquired a company in LA and then acquired a company in New York.
Okay.
And then had a few assets in Colorado at the time when I was there. But really my job in corporate development was look at developers around the country, see if they have any interest in joining our platform.
Yeah.
They had a really good software platform that made it easy to, you could give them 100 addresses and they could say, okay, these 10 properties have the best potential for solar economics.
Yeah. So y'all weren't actually developing solar assets?
So they had the software and then they were saying, okay, now we actually have the balance sheet from NCAP.
Oh, I got you now.
These
I got you. Understood.
So they developed and they wanted to own through the life, which a lot of developers are more like wildcatters where they're almost doing the permitting, the initial design work, and then they find someone with a big balance sheet and say, come buy this project for me and I'll go find more.
Done the grunt work, flip it. And
exactly.
Then,
which was super interesting. Definitely culture-wise was very different than...
Well, that's what I was about to ask you. I want to dive into that a little bit because, I think it's interesting when you look at, I've drawn out this knowledge graph and kind of the social graph as well. And oil and gas is at the center of it, but then you have all these adjacent energy verticals, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, carbon capture, you go down the list, and a lot of these adjacent energy verticals need to leverage the experience and the expertise of oil and gas industry. And, you hear a lot of like, oh, there's going to be jobs in renewables and things of this nature. But, oil and gas is obviously still a big part of the world right now and will continue to be. And so breaking down these barriers and friction to allow people to share information with each other and work in like, hey, an oil and gas guy should be able to go to a renewables company and provide value there. And so talk a little bit about like that cultural dynamic, especially being up in, Colorado where it's kind of, it's kind of a hotbed for divisiveness when it comes to energy. And so tell me what that experience was like.
Yeah. I mean, I guess just the cultural difference maybe is I felt like a lot of people in the solar world are, they believe very strongly that what they're doing is saving the planet. Where oil and gas guys, for the most part, are more in the boat of, hey, I'm I'm doing this because I like it. I like the people. I like the work, and I can make a bunch of money doing it.
Well, that's what I was about to say is like the oil and gas industry. I tell everyone this. It's like the oil and gas industry is one of the most capitalistic industries you'll ever meet. If they can 100%. Make money underwriting solar, wind, or any other energy asset, they'll do it. Because at the end of the day, they want to make money. And
it's very different economics. So that was what was cool about my role there was I saw project economics around the country and kind of got a feel for, one of the things that blew my mind was as a project owner, most of the guys that were owning these projects through life were still only earning, 8 to 12% was maybe a great economic return where you drill a well, most guys would say, hey, we're not drilling a well unless we think we can earn 25% plus.
Jack those numbers up.
Exactly. But it was, and the solar argument there would be, well, it's usually under a contract, like a 20-year power purchase agreement. And so it's a little bit more secured.
Yeah. It looks more like a bond product because you have a long PPA that goes along with it.
And that is, in my mind, fundamentally, it is more of a fixed income product.
Yeah.
But guys can make a lot of money because of the financing options that are available. So, when I talk about that, guys earning 10 to 12%, costs had come down like 90% over the last decade.
Yeah.
So I was looking at these numbers for the first time and being an oil and gas guy, very skeptical of the economics of solar, just from what I had heard previously.
Yeah.
And so I look at that and say, how could guys earn 10 to 12% now? Costs have come down 90%. What were they earning 10 years ago? And when you look at that, you kind of say, well, most of these guys that own projects are buying it from developers, and the developers really are spending, a little bit of engineering work, kind of just doing the site procurement, like, hey, you landowner, let me use your property.
Yeah. You're building the foundation for, exactly.
100%.
Like kind of the dirt work aspect of it. Right?
Yeah. And get it to NTP, notice to proceed.
Yeah.
And then usually sell it at that point. And really what ended up happening is what the price they could sell it for is almost like a goal seek for the project owner to earn 10 to 12%. So 10 years ago, the developers probably got paid a little bit less than they do today. But really, the project owners still earn what they were earning, and the consumer didn't necessarily.
Yeah, so they're just like
benefit.
reverse engineering, like, hey, we need to get like that 10 to 12% for the project owner, and then kind of build, built down from that.
Exactly. So as costs came down, a lot of times the benefit or the beneficiaries were the developers, more so than the long-term project owners or the consumers themselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's so much back and forth on wind and solar, if it's profitable, if it's not profitable. There's a lot of noise out there, and there's obviously renewable energy credits and things of that nature too that get thrown into the mix. And so I'm always just like super curious, like I want to see like real numbers from all of these deals, and if it does make sense, if it doesn't. But I mean, if you're getting just call it 8 to 12% return, I mean, hey, it makes money. Now, the thing that I'm interested in too is, we talked about, like the cost of materials coming down. Well, now cost of materials maybe showing that it's trending up. Just simple supply and demand. You look at, it's kind of like oil and gas. Like, you have different tiers of rock, and who chewed through all the tier 1 rock, and renewables. We've taken all the low hanging fruit and renewables as well. But the most interesting part about this to me is I was talking about this because I had a tweet that some people that are in renewables that are friends of mine had some beef with, and we talked about it, and I kind of explained my thought. But I said that if you look at, everyone talks about renewable energy being cheaper, but they don't take in end-to-end costs, like battery storage or backup power generation. They only look at it at the asset level. That's like, this is very similar to what oil and gas did in American shale, where it's like, hey, we've got a 40% IRR on this well on a half cycle economic basis. If you back out G&A and land costs, and I'm like, well, that's not a true representation of your true cost. And when I was talking to my friends in renewables, they're like, oh, well, the asset owner, the project owner, they don't care about that. Like, they're making money. Battery storage is someone else's problem. I was like, yeah, well, whose problem it is? It's the end user. 100%. Because if our electricity prices are going up, and because we need to invest all this CapEx in battery storage, or we have degraded reliability in the grid and blackouts because we haven't developed load balancing or transmission yet. And so that's a like real conversation that I want to have, is like, hey, all of these things need to be looked at on end to end and kind of on a level playing field. Yeah,
1000%. And from my perspective, I think when I think about solar relative to natural gas or nuclear, I think the biggest thing is, you could spend $100 trillion on solar in the US, but at 9 p.m. get zero power. And that's typically when we're using a lot of power.
This duck curve out in California 100%. Is insane, right? I mean, just getting stupid cheap prices in the middle of the day.
And so I think renewables answer has always been, well, we'll have batteries and that'll kind of fix the problem where we'll charge batteries. But then you look at and I think the biggest issue with renewables in general is the duplication of capital cost. So if I had one house and I want to power it exclusively with solar and batteries, I need enough solar to generate the power I need during the day, and also charge my battery, charge my battery so at night I can use my battery. So that means you need more solar than just the solar that would technically spec you through the day. And then when you think about your battery storage, you need enough battery storage where, hey, if it's a cloudy day, like I got to be able to generate power from that. So
I'm very skeptical that we'll ever have commercial scale battery storage for energy assets. I already think that electric vehicles will be pretty hard so that's, but like I'm a huge fan of residential solar. Like I love I'm just like very anti-government at times. So I'm like, fuck the man. I've got my own little microgrid here at my house.
And distributed generation, I think that's maybe the biggest push is, hey, I don't want to be subject to the government telling me what power I have access to. I think what's interesting is like and to your point about end users kind of being the people that sometimes take the brunt of some of these choices are a market like Colorado where it's a regulated market, Xcel Energy or whoever the provider is, they are more or less kind of entitled to like an 8% return on their assets. So if they, somebody puts solar on their building or community solar, and all of a sudden Xcel is selling less power, to earn that same return on their assets, they have to charge more for the power that they do sell.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
So and that's always a big debate, but I think if you look at a lot of markets where there's high renewable penetration, you do usually see higher power costs, and that could be subject to a whole bunch of variables, population density, and
there's a lot that can go into that. But like my thing is I think that when you talk about energy, one, it's very much dependent on geographic location. Like you look at West Texas, hey, you got a ton of oil and gas, you got a ton of wind, you got a solar. Guess what? You don't have any hydro because you're in the middle of a desert, And so it's very geographically dependent, and you should use what resources you have in that area. But I think it's like, I don't think that's a coincidence that we've had such a high penetration of wind power generation and solar power generation in Texas, and all of a sudden, we're having a lot of blackouts and grid issues. And I just think that it's a lack of proper planning and scaling renewables a little bit too quickly without the systems to manage them. And so, but yeah, I find, sorry to kind of like go into this topic. I mean, this is super interesting.
I love talking about energy.
Because, I love talking about energy too. Yeah. So, but I think it's important because, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people throw around this term energy independence, and energy independence to me it's pie in the sky. It's not a real thing. And really the name of the game is having a diverse and secure energy mix. And so that's wind, that's solar, that's oil and gas, that's nuclear, hydro, coal. And that's what it's really about. And so solar plays a part. And I just love that you were an oil and gas guy, made that crossover to solar. Now you cross back over in oil and gas. You're like, I don't give a shit. I'll go wherever.
Yeah, definitely. Like obviously different culture, but in some ways they are similar. Like a solar project, a lot of times it's a 30-year model, similar to the way a well is a 30-year type of investment. But it's just sort of a different way of thinking about the world. And they really are in the power business, where oil guys are, you think about oil that could be used for power. It could be used for roads, whatever.
Oil is used for fuels and petro.
It's probably only 60% transport. I think is like where the numbers shake out. So I think.
But I think that it's an extremely interesting time to be working in energy, and there's so much opportunity. I was just talking about this on lunch. I was talking about it. I used to talk to the SPE chapters. I still do talk to SPE chapters, but in 2020, like during COVID, there's all these kids that, kind of depressed. They're like, man, oil's negative $40. I'm a petroleum engineer that's graduating in a few months. And I told them, I said, guys, there's so much opportunity in the energy industry as I kind of disregard the noise. Disregard what you're hearing on a macro, but the crossover of talent and skill between software, between oil and gas, between renewables, it's like you can really bolster up your skill set and resume by getting exposure to all of these different things and being the guy that can talk all of it, right?
And it's important. I mean, I think when you look at like public policy, energy impacts, that when you talk about the end user, the consumers, like energy impacts everything you do, whether it's your home life or all the products. Energy costs get baked into almost every product. When you think about transporting stuff from different countries, different states, that all gets baked into your product costs. So there's almost nothing more important maybe other than water. When you think about, just everyone's everyday life in America.
No, energy is at the core of life. And I don't just mean that like metaphorically, like the universe is energy is at the center of everything.
And then, like when they talk about inflation and CPI, and you look at those numbers, it's like they take them into different buckets. Energy is one of those buckets. But energy is rolling into all the other buckets because
it's upstream of everything.
Exactly.
That's I'm kind of a energy maximalist, and so it's like at my house, like I want to build out this whole microgrid. I want rooftop solar. I want a Tesla battery wall. Then I want a Cummins nat gas generator in the backyard. And I'm like, I'm never going to be out of power.
Well, and I think that is like, from my opinion, public policy decisions where they're saying, hey, you know, we're not going to build any new natural gas and coal, and we're only going to build, you know, wind and solar and batteries. I think a lot of times what you're going to see is you probably see slightly higher power prices. Maybe not everywhere. Geography matters. But I think you'll see more of those blackouts, and the result of that is probably more people buying generators.
Yeah, no.
And so you may end up with...
I'm going, trust me, man.
Yeah,
like,
off-grid.
I was always a huge Cummins fanboy. I was like, I'm buying stock, like all the genset companies, because that is a really real thing. And, you know, it's funny, we were talking about distributed energy a second ago. What you're also seeing is these huge nat gas turbines that are getting moved into the oil and gas industry, and, you know, being used for like electric fracs and things of that nature. But I also learned that, you know, peaker plants are buying them because you can spin them up real quick and in peak demand. And then it's like, oh, you start thinking about the microgrids that can be built out in the oil field. It's like, oh, hey, we got this nat gas generator out here. So when the grid needs power, boom, we can feed it with gas. And so they're just like so many cool things that are happening across the spectrum. And
for sure.
I'm going to tie this back to metering here. Watch how smooth this is, you know, talking about building the microgrid at your house. Like, when it really gets interesting is when you have these bidirectional meters and you can start charging your batteries at the house and then sell back into the grid, which you see happening in places like California, and Tesla's got some partnerships. So bringing it back to metering. So, you know, when did Multiphase, kind of give me like a history on Multiphase metering for liquids? Like, you know, you talk about these kind of more traditional meters that have a radiation source. When did those come out on the scene?
I don't know the exact years, but they've been around for a while.
They've been around for a long time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And actually, you know, some of the guys that started FlowDatix, because FlowDatix has been around for a while. It's been a lot of its infancy in a lab, basically proving the technology works on 1-phase, 2-phase, 3-phase, get it to work on a flow loop.
Yeah.
And then really just the last year and a half taking it out to the field and actually testing it. But
how did you get over to FlowDatix? Because you're the CEO now.
Yep.
But you told me you weren't one of the founders, so hired a gun. How did you
so I had worked for a group that had invested in FlowDatix and was very involved in the company. So I was familiar with their story, kind of what they were trying to do. And he had called me kind of late last year, just saying, hey, they were looking for a CEO to be a US based guy and really help spearhead the push into the US market.
Yeah.
And kind of said it more in the frame of, do you know anybody?
Yeah.
And I kind of took that call, thought about it for a day and said, hey, I think I'm interested. I think I had going to mine, spending a lot of time in petroleum.
I feel like the do you know anybody's always a soft way of like, hey, do you know anybody? Like, but you want to do this?
Right. And I don't know if that's what it was or not, but that's how it turned out.
Hey, shoot, dog. You want
exactly. So, so I, knew a lot about their story and had a lot of good relationships in oil and gas with guys that work at operators.
Yeah.
And so we're at this stage of doing field trials with people.
Nice.
Which I think, from what I've heard talking with operators, traditionally a field trial with other companies look like, hey, buy a meter and try it out and let us know how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're more like, hey, we'll come to your well. It's totally free of cost to you. You let us hook up, we record, we see if the meter works for your well, your conditions.
Yeah.
And if we prove to you that it works, then let's talk about selling you a meter or renting you a meter, whatever business model.
So y'all are running trials out in the field right now?
Correct.
That's where y'all are at?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Are you doing this up in Colorado, I assume? Or?
So we've done testing in Colorado. We've done testing in Oklahoma.
Okay.
We've done testing in California.
Cool.
So obviously we'd love to do something in Texas.
Yeah.
We'd love to do something.
So if anyone's listening and they need they want to be a pilot.
100%.
Cool.
And I think, like I said, the biggest thing is maybe mentally when people think about a pilot, they think of, hey, I got to spend money and not really get anything out of it.
Yeah.
And our goal, what we've tried to do is make this as painless, as low cost to them as possible, where we bring our own field guys, we have hoses to hook up the meter to the, as long as they have some form of connection to their tree or a flow line, we can just pipe in.
Yeah.
That takes 30 minutes. We don't have a nuclear source. So you're not having to worry about that for a field trial.
Yeah.
So field trials have been super easy in the past where we've been able to make it pretty painless for the operator.
Got you. So is the idea of using a multi-phase meter to get rid of the separator and everything? I mean, you're still going to need, some.
Yeah,
plumbing,
I think in my mind, there's really 3 big use cases. So the biggest, maybe like pie in the sky goal for a lot of production guys is, hey, get me to tankless facilities. So every pad, I don't need to have a bunch of separators and tanks.
Yeah.
They could all feed to a bulk facility.
But
you still need to have good measurement of how much oil and gas is coming out of each well. How do you pay your mineral owners?
Yeah.
Because it could be different on each well on a pad.
Yeah.
So you still need good measurement, and your engineers kind of want to know how much is actually coming out of each well.
No, yes, yeah.
Right. So
I was gonna say it's not just mineral owners, but just from a basic understanding of your business, you need to know how much you're producing.
So that really, to me, like for us, is the biggest market opportunity is, hey, can you get to a world where somebody has their trees, a meter, everything goes to a bulk facility, and you can consolidate into bigger equipment.
So it's essentially, you have one huge tank battery facility in the middle of a lease instead of having all of these kind of disparate facilities.
Exactly.
Just pipe in over
and
there.
I think the benefit of that is, cost is probably the biggest one. That's maybe the simplest case for someone to think about is, hey, one of these meters costs X amount, a separator and skids and tanks and all that are going to cost, however many times more than the meter. But the other piece of this, and maybe it matters more in markets like Colorado or New Mexico, but methane monitoring has become kind of standard place in markets like Colorado.
Yeah.
And limiting methane emissions, I think, is something the whole industry is trying to do.
Yeah.
But when you have all of these pads spread out all over, all have tanks, all have pressure bearing vehicles, that the best way to release pressure is to open a valve, and stuff's going to come out when you do that.
Yeah.
So is really this idea of like you consolidate to one big facility. That means you only have to monitor one facility.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's less pipe connections, so you don't have those areas that are potential areas that could leak methane. So I think there's a lot of benefits beyond just cost. Of doing
that's really interesting.
This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, BETA, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX.
With the, it's cool to hear that y'all are getting some equipment out in the field and using it. I'm sure that's really, exciting to do that and get that going. Is oil and gas the always going to be the target market, or are there other use cases for multi-phase meters, like in water municipalities or something like that they can be used?
So for sure, there's other uses for multi-phase measurement. I think what we're doing and kind of the way our meter works, oil and gas really is the focus. And
gotcha.
We haven't necessarily done any tests outside of oil and gas.
But
if anybody's listening and they've got a water pipe and they want to know if there's
also just a question for me. I'm just like, this is how I discover stuff. I'm like, I wonder if it has any applications.
But there's been guys, like midstream guys have kind of mentioned, hey, I want a way to know if there's liquids in my gas line, or there's, oil in my water line or water in my oil line. Yeah. Can you help us with that?
So tell me a little bit about that, from like the software component and how y'all are thinking about it. Pretend I'm a production engineer and we have one of FlowDatix meters out there. From the software perspective and the analytical perspective, is this something that I can see like in real time? Is this something that has to be processed and sent back? Like how does that look?
Yeah, so it's real time. So effectively, set our meter up next to the tree, and then we run an Ethernet cable to a laptop.
Okay.
And there's electronic boards on the meter that do some of the processing. The laptop, it could be an edge device, is doing the rest of the processing.
Gotcha.
But it's taking data at 500 hertz, computing rates at 20 hertz, so 20 times a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're able to show data in basically real time.
Oh, wow.
So that's flow rates in real time, and then also that 3D, the 3D
So
time
do you
lapse.
have to, you run an Ethernet cable to it. I'm assuming if you had an edge computing device out there, can it push it to, where if you're an engineer?
Yeah. So we've been using
office.
Starlink RV.
Nice.
Just kind of as it's actually an amazingly cost effective solution.
Starlink is wild.
Well, and for oil and gas, it's the perfect solution.
Yeah.
I think like a Starlink RV unit is $650.
Yeah.
The internet is like $140, $150 a month.
Yeah.
And usually every well site we've been to, we've gotten at least a couple megs a second up.
Yeah.
Which is really, I mean, if you need more than that,
yeah,
you're probably pushing up more data than you should.
Yeah.
And our meter does generate a ton of data. We've just kind of figured out the right amount to.
Dude, I've seen
send
Starlink in remote places like on ranches, and it's like doing like 100 megs, and I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it does. It does better.
Yeah.
The more remote it is, honestly, I think something like, so the more permanent Starlink installations, you do get a certain amount of guaranteed bandwidth.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
Starlink RV, I think, is more like you get what's available.
Yeah.
So for those situations, what's available can be dictated by how many other Starlink RV units.
Yeah, there could be other people
pulling
hogging up the bandwidth.
So the further away you go from other people, I think the better that it works.
Oh man, that's so crazy. It's crazy to think about because I got in the oil field in 2010. And I mean, I've just been to some remote places where, just not a chance that you have any communication signal, so no cell signal. And, even back when we started this podcast, man, 2018, that wasn't that long ago. And like a common theme was like, oh yeah, we got a lot of cool technologies, but connectivity issues. Yeah. And like, that was a huge bottleneck to being able to deploy anything. And now it's like, no one even talks about that anymore. Like, it's just not, it's not a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, when I think about us, so like our, when we run our meter, the laptop, we can see results real time. And then we also have a cloud portal. Yeah. So a customer can log in and they can see the results basically real time. Cool. What our flow rates are showing. But even on the site, we can sit there, open up the cloud portal. So data is going, laptop up to the cloud.
And then back. Yeah.
Back. And we can see it on that portal and basically see it compared to our laptop. And it's basically real time.
Like almost no latency in that. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. So, if someone's listening to this first, if y'all are out in Midland, come check out FlowDatix at Energy Tech Night. It's going to be awesome time, and you can come hang out with the FlowDatix team out there. But someone wants to get more information on y'all, wants to talk to y'all, where can they find you?
Yeah. So I think probably the best way is FlowDatix.com.
Okay.
That's our website. There's some images of our meter, kind of some videos, the 3D time lapse. Cool. We've recently kind of been working to update all that. So that's probably the best place to learn a little bit more. And then they can always reach out to me. Cool. So, my cell phone's 720.
No, don't give out cell phone
number.
All right. Yeah, don't do that. You can find them on LinkedIn.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
But you can have like all kinds of spammers calling you. Cool, dude. No, this is super fascinating, to be honest. I'm going to open up the conversation. I'm like, oh, meters, like,
it's not the most exciting topic.
It's kind of boring, right?
Yeah.
But that's what I love about this industry is like some really high tech stuff going into really kind of just boring applications. But it's extremely cool. So, dude, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right, y'all. If y'all like this show, please send it over to a friend. Send it over to an E&P that is looking for some multi-phase metering. If they have some methane tracking and mitigation plans. I already know a few friends that I'll probably send this to. So send it over to all your E&P friends. If you learned something from a guy that's been in oil and gas and solar, I thought that was pretty fascinating. Appreciate y'all sharing it over on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever your favorite social platform is. We'll catch you guys on the next show.